Hello and welcome to this penultimate episode of the second season of Among the Ancients, a close reading series from the London Review of Books with Emily Wilson and me, Thomas Jones. Today we're talking about Apuleius and his novel, The Metamorphoses, or The Golden Ass, the only ancient Roman novel to have survived in its entirety, and it tells the rambling, or picaresque, you might say, and digressive adventures of Lucius, a man who accidentally turns himself into a donkey. We'll be using Sarah Rudin's translation for Yale University Press. But before we get to the novel, Emily, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the novelist, who Apuleius was, where and when he lived, and so on.
Yes, so he was roughly a contemporary of Lucian, whom we talked about when we were talking about the Greeks earlier this season. So he was born in roughly 120, 124-ish AD and died maybe 170-ish. So he's certainly, there's no evidence of him knowing about anything after the late 160s. But of course, he might have lived on without writing anything or doing anything of note. He was an inhabitant of North Africa. He was born in the Roman colony of Madaros, which is now in Algeria. He was the son of a magistrate who was rich and powerful enough to send his sons to be educated in Athens. So he had a solid foundation in Platonism from his Athenian education. And I guess we can get into what Platonism meant in the 2nd century AD. And then he came back to Africa. We know more about his biography than for some ancient writers because his apology, which is his defense speech when he was tried for magic or witchcraft, survives. And we know from that, obviously, it's a speech of self-defense, so one can read all kinds of...
Well, all autobiography is...
Not necessarily a totally straight-up... this is me telling the absolute truth about my life. It's me telling the best possible truth that will make me get acquitted. But it's an ornate rhetorical speech defending himself from... Once he got back from his studies in Athens, he travelled around North Africa and was staying in what's modern Tripoli, Oya, another ancient Roman city province, with a college friend of his, or a guy he'd met in Athens. And in the course of having a very long visit at that house, he and his friend's mother got engaged to be married. But the friend was marrying a woman whose father felt that his daughter must have been cheated out of her possible inheritance by the fact that this mother had this new fiancé who was going to take all the family inheritance, and this man must have bewitched the woman. So it was a trial on the charge of witchcraft. And Apuleius defends himself, explaining that, in fact, he's just charming and highly educated, and that's not magic. It's instead, and also maybe interesting from the perspective of the Golden Ass, he also says that he's been initiated into several mystery rites. So he's religious and pious, as well as philosophical and highly educated. And then we know that he also then, after that, made various kinds of living, both as a speech writer, speech deliverer, celebrity orator. Some of those celebrity speeches survive in his Florilegia, and also that he organized gladiatorial and beast shows, which also, that interest in shows and the theatrical and performative things also gets into the Golden Ass. And he wrote a whole bunch of other stuff that hasn't survived.
And that story about how he came to be prosecuted for bewitching his friend's mother and so on, that could almost be a story out of the Golden Ass. I mean, it's full of that sort of stuff.
Very easily, yes. Yes, very full of that kind of thing, yes.
Except there is real witchcraft in it as well. Well, real witchcraft. There is, in the novel, there is plenty of magic, for all that he disavowed it in life.
Yes, I mean, the fact that he was in a position of having to disavow it also means that he's living in a cultural world where there's very strong belief in real magic. And of course, the novel takes place not in real life North Africa, but in the dangerous land of Thessaly in Greece. So I think it's also interesting just from the perspective of where is the centre of the world. The centre of the world, of course, is North Africa, and these distant provinces of the wilds of Greece are where scary, witchy women might enchant you and turn you into animals and take off body parts of various kinds.
Yeah, and as we know from reading Lucan, that Thessaly, famous for its witches.
Famous for the witches, yes, exactly.
And there is necromancy in Apuleius as well, but it's treated very differently from the way it's treated in Lucan, the way that it's horror in Lucan, and it's...
Yes. That question of, is it just pure comedy, or is there some kind of serious point underneath all the comedy, is always there in Apuleius, but it's certainly not pure horror. It's certainly, at least on some level, entertaining and fun when people rise from the dead and have things chopped off from their noses and their bodies.
I mean, I don't know if it's possible to sort of summarise it. I mean, and somehow to Tracy, the golden ass is sort of to lose everything about it that's interesting. But
lose everything that's fun. Yes.
But very broadly, I mean, there is the plot, I suppose, that he gets turned into a donkey, or maybe that's just it. He's turned into a donkey, has some adventures, and then becomes a man again at the end.
Then becomes a person again, yes. yes. And in fact, I mean, we should also put out there that Apuleius didn't make that general plot up. And in fact, we have at least a version of his source, which is called The Ass, Onos. It's a Greek novella. And what we have is at least somewhat abridged version of that Greek novella. And so we can sort of see from that, assuming that we have most of the bones of that original source, we can see what Apuleius has added to it. So he's added huge numbers of the digressions. So the basic plot that you just outlined of bumbling guy, curious, gets involved with dangerous witches, gets turned into a donkey, a couple of adventures, and then he gets turned back. Whereas Apuleius sort of blows it up and also interlayers all this interest in both philosophical and religious eclecticism, in religious cult, goddesses, far, far, far more digressions, the whole Cupid and Psyche story, and then also the interest in Platonism, none of which is apparent in the source.
Yeah, and he says at the beginning, doesn't he? He acknowledges that he says there was a Greek
stolen
original.
From a Greek story. Exactly. Yes. So it's a story about translation that is itself a translation.
Yeah. Should we listen to the very beginning now in Sarah Rudin's translation for Yale? So this is the very beginning of book 1.
Well, let me weave together various sorts of tales, using the Milesian mode as a loom, if you will. Witty and dulcet tones are going to stroke your too kind ears, as long as you don't turn a spurning nose up at an Egyptian papyrus, scrawled over with a sharp pen from the Nile. I'll make you wonder at human forms and fortunes transfigured, torn apart, but then mended back into their original state. Now, to my preface. Who's writing there, you ask? In a few words, my ancient stock is from Attic Hymettus and the Epherian Isthmus and Spartan Taenarus. All that fertile sod has been immortalised by books more fertile still. There, as my boyhood began, I served my first tour of literary duty in the Athenian tongue. Then, as a foreigner in the Latian city, I invaded the speech native to the Quirites curriculum, settled on it, and worked it for all it was worth. And it was harrowing, as I had no teacher walking ahead and pointing out what to do. So here I am, pleading in advance to be let off if I commit some offence, as I'm still a greenhorn. To me, the speech of the Roman Forum is outlandish, but this very change of language suits the genre-jumping training I have undertaken. The story we are starting has a Greek original, you see. Give heed, reader. There is delight to be had.
And so that quite strange English that Sarah Rudin uses, and that reflects the strangeness of the Latin.
The Latin is really weird, yes. I mean, the Latin is this whole sort of combination of classical Latin, I mean, the kind of Latin that Cicero uses, along with Latin that's very much post-classical, and also coinages and huge amounts of alliteration and playing around with language. I mean, this is obviously a passage that's about being multilingual and about being a sort of outsider to language and therefore being able to play or hop from horse to horse in terms of languages. I like the Sarah Rudin translation because it brings out the oddity and the weirdness of the language as well as the various colloquialisms of it, and that it combines the high and the low constantly, which of course the text itself does more broadly as well. There are ways that the original is, as is so often with Latin, much more condensed than the Sarah Rudin English is able to be. I mean, the fact that last word, velitabaris.
Delight, is that there is,
yes.
Yeah, there is delight to be had.
There is delight to be had, which is one word in Latin, but is however many, there is delight to be had, how many words that is. It's a lot of words for one word in Latin. But that whole question of do you have delight only if you pay attention, or what's the relationship between education and delight, is done so in such a condensed way in the original, and of course has to get spelt out if you're going to make it clear in English. But also there's so much already in that passage about just that confusion of who is talking, and the fact that the speaker then speaks up about, you must be wondering who I am. And of course it's sort of muddling, is this person Apuleius? Is this person Lucius, whom we haven't met yet? And how is identity formed by language or location or body or by literary illusion, or what is it to be a person? And what is it to be, like, who is this?
And it also makes very clear that it's a written text. It's not a speech, it's not being spoken, it's not a story that's being told and listened to. It's a story that's being read, that it's on papyrus with a pen.
With a particular kind of pen and a particular kind of paper, yes. Even though, I think it's quite likely that Apuleius delivered bits of this as entertainment orally as well, but it's very much alluding to the process of writing, yeah.
Thanks for listening to this extract from Among the Ancients 2, a close reading series from the London Review of Books. To listen to the full episode and all our other close reading series, including Series 1 of Among the Ancients, sign up to our close reading subscription at lrb.me/close readings or click on the link in the description.